Sarah Matthews stepped off the military transport plane into the scorching heat of Kandahar province. Her camera bag slung across her shoulder and notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The smell of dust and diesel fuel filled her nostrils as she surveyed the chaos around her. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim under the weight of their helmets and the knowledge of what lay beyond the base perimeter. At 28, Sarah had already covered conflicts in 3 different countries, but Afghanistan felt different. The mountains loomed in the distance like silent sentinels, hiding dangers she could only imagine. Her editor back in New York had been reluctant to send her into such a volatile region, but Sarah had convinced him that the world needed to see what was happening here, through the eyes of someone who could tell the human story behind the headlines. Captain Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 40s with kind eyes that had seen too much, greeted her at the landing strip. "Miss Matthews, welcome to Forward Operating Base Thunder. I'll be your liaison during your stay here. I hope you're ready for what you're about to see." Sarah nodded, adjusting the straps of her bulletproof vest. "I've been preparing for this assignment for months, Captain. I want to show the world what these soldiers go through every day." The first week passed in a blur of interviews and observations. Sarah spent her days talking to young soldiers who were barely out of high school, listening to their stories of home and their fears about the missions they faced. She photographed them during their daily routines, capturing quiet moments of humanity amidst the machinery of war. There was Private Johnson from Ohio, who showed her pictures of his newborn daughter he had never held. Sergeant Williams from Texas, who had been in country for 8 months, and counted each day until his rotation home. Lieutenant Chen from California, who read poetry in her spare time and dreamed of becoming a teacher when her service ended. The soldiers initially treated Sarah with polite distance, unsure how to interact with a civilian reporter in their midst, but her genuine interest in their stories and her willingness to share in their daily hardships gradually broke down the barriers. She ate the same meals, slept in similar quarters, and never complained about the harsh conditions. Slowly, they began to open up to her. "You're different from the other reporters who've come through here," Private Johnson told her one evening as they sat outside the mess tent, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Most of them just want the dramatic stuff. You actually listen." "Most. I mar." Sarah smiled, her pen poised over her notebook. "Everyone has a story worth telling. The trick is taking the time to hear it." During her second week, Captain Rodriguez approached her with an opportunity that would change everything. "We're going out on a patrol tomorrow to visit some of the local villages. It's part of our Hearts and Minds campaign, trying to build relationships with the civilian population. Would you like to come along? It would give you a chance to see a different side of our mission here." Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. This was exactly the kind of story she had come to tell. "Absolutely. What should I expect?" "It's routine mostly. We'll visit the village elder, distribute some medical supplies, and check on a school we've been helping to rebuild. The area has been quiet lately, but we always travel in full combat gear as a precaution. You'll need to stay close to the convoy at all times." That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the story she would write. She imagined describing the hope in children's faces when soldiers brought school supplies, the gratitude of families receiving medical care, the slow but important work of building trust between 2 very different cultures. This was the kind of reporting that could make a real difference, showing people back home that war wasn't just about combat and casualties. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Sarah joined the patrol as they prepared their vehicles, checking weapons and communication equipment with methodical precision. She noticed how the mood among the soldiers was different from their usual base routine. There was a focused intensity, an awareness that they were moving beyond the relative safety of the compound into territory where danger could emerge from any direction. Lieutenant Chen helped Sarah into the back of the armored vehicle. "Remember, if anything happens, stay down and do exactly what we tell you. Our job is to bring you back safe." Sarah nodded, her heart rate beginning to increase as the reality of the situation set in. She had covered conflicts before, but always from relatively safe positions. This was her first time venturing into an active combat zone with a patrol. The convoy of 4 vehicles moved slowly through the gates of the base and onto the dusty road that led toward the village. Sarah watched the landscape roll by through the thick glass windows, noting how peaceful it looked. Farmers worked in fields, children played near mud brick houses, and life seemed to continue with a normalcy that belied the underlying tensions of the region. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Remember, we're here to build relationships. Smile, be respectful, and let the locals see that we're here to help, not to threaten." The village of Kamar sat in a valley between two hills. Its buildings clustered around a central square, where a well provided water for the community. As the convoy approached, Sarah could see villagers gathering to watch their arrival. Some faces showed curiosity, others wariness. Children pressed forward for a better look at the strange vehicles, while their parents pulled them back with protective instincts honed by years of uncertainty. The soldiers dismounted with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter, while Captain Rodriguez and his team prepared to meet with the village elder. Sarah followed closely, her camera ready to document this intersection of two worlds. The village elder, a man named Abdul Rahman with a white beard and intelligent eyes, greeted the soldiers with formal politeness. Through an interpreter, he welcomed them to Kamar and inquired about the supplies they had brought. Sarah watched the careful dance of diplomacy, noting how both sides worked to bridge the gaps of language and culture that separated them. "We have medicine for the clinic and books for the school," Captain Rodriguez explained. "We want to make sure your children have what they need to learn and grow." Abdul Rahman nodded approvingly. "Education is the foundation of a better future. We are grateful for your assistance." Sarah moved among the gathering crowd, her camera capturing moments of interaction between soldiers and villagers. She photographed Sergeant Williams, showing a group of children how to use a stethoscope, their faces bright with wonder at the strange instrument. She documented Private Johnson helping to unload boxes of textbooks, his careful handling of the precious cargo, a testament to the mission's importance. The morning passed peacefully, with genuine smiles exchanged and small bridges of understanding built between the Americans and the Afghans. Sarah began to relax, feeling confident that she was witnessing exactly the kind of positive story she had hoped to tell. The soldiers were clearly committed to their mission of building relationships, and the villagers seemed genuinely appreciative of the assistance. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Captain Rodriguez began preparations for the return journey to base. "Pack it up, everyone. We want to be back before the afternoon heat makes travel more difficult." Sarah took a few final photographs of children playing with pencils and notebooks they had received, their laughter a universal language that needed no translation. She felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her story would show a different side of the war, one focused on hope and human connection rather than violence and destruction. The convoy reformed on the road leading back toward the base, the soldiers maintaining their professional alertness despite the successful conclusion of the morning's mission. Sarah settled into her seat in the armored vehicle, already planning how she would structure her article to capture both the complexity and the humanity of what she had witnessed. Lieutenant Chen checked her radio and weapon one final time before the vehicle began moving. "Good mission today. The villagers seemed genuinely happy to see us." Sarah nodded, reviewing her notes and the images she had captured on her camera's display screen. "It's exactly the kind of story people need to hear. There's so much more happening here than what makes the evening news." The road stretched ahead of them, winding through the same peaceful landscape they had traversed that morning. Sarah watched the familiar scenery pass by, feeling a growing sense of accomplishment. She had successfully documented an important aspect of the military's work in Afghanistan, and her story would help readers understand the complex realities of modern warfare. But as the convoy rounded a bend in the road, approaching a narrow pass between two hills, everything changed in an instant. The peaceful morning dissolved into chaos as the sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the valley, and Sarah's world transformed from one of hope and human connection into a nightmare of survival and split-second decisions that would test every instinct she possessed. The first shot shattered the windshield of the lead vehicle, sending spiderweb cracks across the reinforced glass. Sarah's world exploded into chaos as Lieutenant Chen shouted into her radio, "Contact front! We're taking fire from the ridge!" The armored vehicle lurched to a halt as the driver sought cover behind a large boulder beside the road. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the reality of the situation crashed over her. This wasn't a story she was observing anymore. She was trapped in the middle of a firefight with nowhere to hide and no way to escape. "Stay down!" Sergeant Williams yelled, pushing Sarah toward the floor of the vehicle as bullets pinged off the armored sides with metallic rings that sounded like deadly hail. Through the thick windows, she could see muzzle flashes winking from positions high on the ridgeline above them. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site perfectly, giving them the high ground and multiple escape routes, while trapping the convoy in the narrow pass below. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, calm despite the deadly situation. "All units, report status. We have sustained fire from multiple positions on the North Ridge. Request immediate air support." Sarah pressed herself against the floor of the vehicle, her notebook and camera forgotten as survival instincts took over. But even in the midst of her terror, her reporter's mind continued to work, taking in details and observations that would later help her understand what was happening around her. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their training taking over as they established defensive positions and began returning fire. Private Johnson appeared at the rear of their vehicle, his face grim but focused as he signaled for them to move to a more secure position. "We need to get to that outcropping over there. It'll give us better cover and a clearer field of fire." Lieutenant Chen grabbed Sarah's arm, her grip firm but reassuring. "We're going to move together. Stay low, follow my lead, and don't stop until we reach those rocks." "Ready?" Sarah nodded, although she wasn't sure she would ever be ready for what came next. The door of the armored vehicle swung open, and suddenly she was running across open ground with bullets whistling overhead. The distance to the rocky outcropping seemed impossibly far, each step an eternity of exposure to the deadly fire coming from above. They reached the shelter of the rocks just as a rocket-propelled grenade exploded near their abandoned vehicle, sending chunks of metal and debris flying through the air. Sarah pressed herself against the stone, breathing heavily and trying to process the fact that she was still alive. "How many shooters?" Captain Rodriguez asked, as he joined them behind the rocks, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning the ridgeline for targets. "At least 6. Maybe more," Sergeant Williams replied. "They're well-positioned and well-armed. This wasn't random. They knew we'd be coming through here." Sarah realized with growing horror that the ambush had been planned specifically for their convoy. Someone had known about their mission to the village and had used that information to set a trap. The peaceful morning and the positive interactions with the villagers now seemed like part of an elaborate setup designed to lure them into this killing ground. The firefight intensified as more insurgent positions opened fire from different angles. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of an automatic weapon chattering from somewhere to their left, its bullets chipping pieces of stone from their protective barrier. The soldiers around her returned fire with careful, aimed shots, their discipline evident even in the chaos of combat. "Air support is 15 minutes out," Captain Rodriguez announced. "We need to hold this position until they arrive." 15 minutes. Sarah tried to calculate how long they could survive under this intense fire. The insurgents clearly had them outnumbered and outgunned, and their position on the high ground gave them significant advantages. She watched the faces of the soldiers around her, noting their calm professionalism even as death rained down from above. Lieutenant Chen moved to a gap between the rocks, exposing herself just enough to get a clear view of the enemy positions. "I can see at least 3 shooters on the left side of the ridge. They're using that old building as cover. I've got eyes on 2 more behind those boulders to the right," Private Johnson added. "They're moving to flank us." Sarah pressed herself deeper into the protective shadow of the rocks, feeling utterly helpless as the soldiers around her risked their lives to defend the position. She had come here to tell their story. But now she was just another liability they had to protect, while fighting for their own survival. A new voice joined the radio chatter, speaking with urgent authority. "This is Eagle 6. We have your position marked. Be advised. Enemy reinforcements are moving down the backside of the ridge. You may have additional company soon." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Not only were they pinned down by the original ambush, but more enemy fighters were approaching their position. Sarah began to understand that this might be more than just a random attack. The level of coordination and planning suggested a significant insurgent operation designed to inflict maximum casualties on American forces. Captain Rodriguez made a difficult decision. We can't wait for air support. If those reinforcements get into position, they'll have us surrounded. We need to move to higher ground and establish a better defensive position. He pointed to a cluster of large boulders about 50 yards up the slope. That position will give us better visibility and fields of fire. We'll move in 2 groups. First group provides covering fire, while the second group advances. Sarah felt a chill of fear as she realized she would have to cross that open ground again, this time under even heavier fire, as they moved uphill toward the enemy positions. But she also recognized that staying where they were meant certain death or capture as the enemy reinforcements closed in around them. Lieutenant Chen checked her weapon and looked directly at Sarah. You're coming with the first group. When we start moving, stay right behind me and don't look back. No matter what happens, keep moving until you reach those rocks. The next few minutes passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. Sarah watched as the soldiers checked their ammunition, adjusted their positions, and prepared for what could be their final assault. She thought about her editor back in New York, about the story she had come here to tell, and about whether anyone would ever know what happened to them in this remote valley. On my mark, Captain Rodriguez whispered into his radio. 3, 2, 1, go. The world erupted in gunfire as half the soldiers provided covering fire, while the others began their desperate rush up the slope. Sarah found herself running again, her legs pumping as she followed Lieutenant Chen through the deadly zone between their old position and their objective. Bullets cracked through the air around them, some so close she could feel the pressure waves as they passed. Halfway up the slope, Private Johnson stumbled and fell, clutching his leg where a bullet had found its mark. Without thinking, Sarah stopped and grabbed his arm, helping him to his feet as Lieutenant Chen provided covering fire from a nearby boulder. Keep moving, Chen shouted. Don't stop. Together, Sarah and the wounded soldier completed the climb to their new position. Diving behind the protective rocks, just as a burst of automatic fire swept across the spot where they had been standing moments before. Private Johnson's leg was bleeding heavily, but he was conscious and alert. Thanks, he gasped, checking his rifle to make sure it was still functional. I owe you one. Sarah had no time to respond, as the second group began their own harrowing journey up the slope. She watched in amazement as Sergeant Williams and the others moved with incredible courage under fire, providing mutual support and covering each other's movements with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. From their new position, they had a much better view of the enemy positions on the ridge. Sarah could see the insurgent fighters more clearly now, noting their positions and movements with the same attention to detail she normally applied to her reporting. But this wasn't a story anymore. This was survival, and she was no longer just an observer. Captain Rodriguez raised his rifle and took careful aim at one of the enemy positions. I count 8 shooters that I can see. There are probably more we can't identify yet. The radio crackled with an update from air support. Eagle 6 to Thunder Base. We're still 10 minutes out. Can you hold your position? Negative, Captain Rodriguez replied grimly. We're taking casualties, and the enemy is moving to surround us. We need immediate support, or we're going to be overrun. Sarah looked around at the soldiers who had risked their lives to protect her, seeing the determination in their faces despite the desperate nature of their situation. These were the same young people she had interviewed over the past 2 weeks, the ones who had shared stories of home and dreams of the future. Now they were fighting for their lives in a remote Afghan valley, and she was the reason they were here. It was then that Lieutenant Chen made an observation that changed everything. That sniper position on the far right is the key. He's got the best angle on our position, and he's the one calling the shots for the others. If we could take him out, it would disrupt their whole operation. Captain Rodriguez studied the position through his scope. It's a difficult shot. At least 400 yards, uphill, with wind factors, and whoever takes it will be exposed to return fire from multiple positions. I can make that shot, Sergeant Williams volunteered. Give me covering fire and I'll get into position. But as they prepared for the attempt, Sarah realized something that none of the soldiers had noticed. From her position, She had a perfect view of the sniper's location. And more importantly, she had something none of them possessed. In her camera bag, alongside her professional photography equipment, was a hunting rifle her father had insisted she bring for protection. She had trained with that rifle since childhood, winning numerous shooting competitions before choosing journalism over her father's dreams of Olympic marksmanship. The moment had come when Sarah Matthews would have to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. She was no longer just a war correspondent observing from the sidelines. She was part of the story now, and 11 perfect shots would determine whether any of them would survive to tell it. Sarah's hands moved to her camera bag with a steadiness that surprised her. The hunting rifle her father had given her lay disassembled in a custom compartment, designed to look like photography equipment to casual inspection. As gunfire continued to rain down around them, she quickly assembled the weapon with movements her muscle memory had perfected during countless hunting trips in the mountains of Colorado. "What are you doing?" Lieutenant Chen asked, her eyes widening as she saw Sarah put together the precision rifle. "Something I should have mentioned earlier," Sarah replied, her voice calmer than she felt. "I've been shooting competitively since I was 12. That sniper position, I can see him perfectly from here. And I have a clean shot." Captain Rodriguez looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "You're a civilian. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight the moment you risked your lives to protect me," Sarah answered, checking the rifle's scope and adjusting it for the distance and wind conditions she observed. "That sniper is the key to their whole operation. If I can take him out, your people have a chance." The truth was, Sarah had been studying the enemy positions with the same analytical eye she applied to her journalism. She had identified the command structure, the key positions, and the vulnerabilities in their setup. The sniper on the far ridge wasn't just another shooter, he was coordinating the entire ambush, directing fire and movement through hand signals she had observed through her camera's telephoto lens. Sergeant Williams, despite his wounded leg, crawled over to provide what cover he could. "If you're going to do this, you need to do it now. Air support is still 8 minutes out, and those reinforcements are getting closer." Sarah settled into a shooting position behind the rocks, using her camera bag as a stabilizing rest. Through the rifle's scope, she could see the enemy sniper clearly. He was well-trained and disciplined, changing position regularly to avoid counter-fire. But his current location gave her a perfect angle, and she had noticed a pattern to his movements. "First shot has to count," she whispered to herself, steadying her breathing and feeling her heart rate slow to the rhythm her father had taught her years ago. "Make it perfect." The rifle spoke with authority, its report echoing across the valley. Through her scope, Sarah saw the enemy sniper jerk backward and disappear from view. The coordinated fire from the ridge immediately became more sporadic and confused as the insurgents lost their primary coordinator. "Outstanding shot," Captain Rodriguez exclaimed. Their whole operation just fell apart, but Sarah wasn't finished. She had identified 10 other positions during her observation. And she knew that eliminating the sniper was just the beginning. The insurgents would reorganize quickly unless she could continue to disrupt their positions. Her second shot took out a machine gunner who was trying to establish a new firing position. The third eliminated a rocket-propelled grenade operator who was moving to flank their position. Each shot was calculated and precise, drawing on years of training and natural ability that had been honed to perfection. "How is she doing this?" Private Johnson asked in amazement as Sarah's fourth shot silenced another enemy position. "She's shooting like a machine." Lieutenant Chen watched through binoculars as Sarah continued her deadly work. "She's not just shooting randomly. She's systematically eliminating their key positions in order of tactical importance. This isn't luck, this is skill." Sarah's fifth shot disrupted an attempt by the insurgents to coordinate a flanking maneuver. Her sixth took out a communications specialist who was trying to call for additional support. Each target was carefully selected to maximize the tactical advantage for the pinned-down soldiers. The enemy fire was becoming increasingly desperate and uncoordinated. Without their sniper to direct operations and with their key positions being eliminated one by one, the insurgents were losing the tactical advantage they had enjoyed at the beginning of the ambush. Sarah's seventh shot prevented an insurgent with explosives from reaching a position where he could threaten their defensive position. Her 8th eliminated a spotter who was directing fire onto their location. The 9th shot took out another machine gun position that was trying to suppress their movement. 2 more positions, Sarah announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The one behind the fallen tree, and the one in the rocks to the left. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating with air support, which was now only minutes away. Eagle 6. This is Thunder Base. We have the situation under control thanks to some unexpected assistance. Enemy positions are being systematically eliminated. Sarah's 10th shot silenced the insurgent behind the fallen tree, eliminating his ability to threaten their planned withdrawal route. The 11th and final shot took out the last coordinated position, leaving only scattered and demoralized fighters who were already beginning to retreat from the ridge. The sudden silence that followed was almost as shocking as the initial ambush had been. After more than 30 minutes of intense combat, the valley fell quiet except for the distant sound of approaching helicopter rotors. Sarah set down her rifle and realized that her hands were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. 11 shots, Sergeant Williams said in awe. 11 targets, 11 hits. I've never seen anything like it. Sarah looked around at the soldiers who had become more than just subjects for her story. They were alive because of decisions she had made and actions she had taken. The line between observer and participant had been permanently erased in those crucial moments when survival depended on skill rather than profession. Lieutenant Chen helped Private Johnson prepare for medical evacuation as the helicopters approached their position. "You saved our lives," she told Sarah. "All of us. We owe you everything." "No," Sarah replied, looking out over the valley where the ambush had taken place. "You gave me the chance to save lives. That's something I'll carry with me forever." Air support arrived to secure the area and provide close air support for their extraction. As they prepared to leave the valley, Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah with a look of profound respect. "I don't know what to put in my after-action report," he said. "How do I explain that a war correspondent single-handedly eliminated an entire insurgent position?" Sarah smiled, though the weight of what had happened was already settling on her shoulders. "You write the truth, Captain. Sometimes the story becomes bigger than the person trying to tell it." The helicopter ride back to base gave Sarah time to process what had occurred. She had come to Afghanistan to document the human side of warfare, to show the courage and dedication of the soldiers serving far from home. Instead, she had become an active participant in the very conflict she had intended to observe. Back at the base, word of the engagement spread quickly through the units. Soldiers who had initially been polite but distant now approached Sarah with genuine respect and gratitude. She had crossed a line that few civilians ever cross, moving from observer to participant in a way that fundamentally changed her relationship with the military personnel around her. Private Johnson, recovering in the medical facility with his wounded leg properly treated, sought her out that evening. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me during the firefight. But more than that, I wanted to ask you something. How do you live with it? Taking those shots, I mean." Sarah had been struggling with the same question since returning to base. "I keep reminding myself that those shots saved lives. Your lives. That has to be enough." Over the following days, Sarah found herself changed by the experience. Her reporting took on a different tone, informed by first-hand knowledge of what combat actually felt like. She wrote about the split-second decisions that soldiers faced, the weight of responsibility they carried, and the bonds that formed between people who depended on each other for survival. The story she eventually published won several journalism awards, but Sarah always felt that the accolades missed the point. The real story wasn't about her transformation from observer to participant, or even about the tactical success of her 11 shots. The real story was about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it, about the thin line between courage and necessity, and about how quickly life could change in the space of a heartbeat. Years later, Sarah would return to covering international conflicts, but she never again traveled without understanding that the line between reporter and participant was far thinner than most people realized. She had arrived in Afghanistan as a war correspondent, seeking to document the experiences of others. She left as someone who had become part of the very story she had come to tell, forever changed by 11 flawless shots that had saved the lives of soldiers who had become more than just subjects for her reporting. The valley where the ambush occurred was later secured by coalition forces, and the insurgent network that had planned the attack was disrupted by follow-up operations. But for Sarah Matthews, the real victory was simpler and more personal. She had faced a moment when everything she believed about herself and her role in the world had been tested, and she had responded with skill, courage, and a commitment to protecting the lives of people who had risked everything to keep her safe. That commitment, forged in the crucible of combat and sealed with 11 perfect shots, would define the rest of her career and remind her every day that sometimes the most important stories are the ones we become part of, rather than simply observe from the outside.